Thank you. So this charity focuses on providing content and educational materials to young people interested in architecture and design. Do you have any advice for teenagers interested in architecture in specific?
When we look towards architects of the future, we're also looking for leaders. Um, and I think it's important for people to kind of consider what role they want to play in that community and being contributors to the conversation of how, um, not only how we build and design spaces for people, but what values we apply to them. At ZGF, we really care about the human experience, sustainable design, being innovative. Um, but all of it has to come with a purpose and a vision. Um, and I think finding and exploring what um, where somebody's passion is kind of the first step. And then how they can help others solve problems. I think a lot of what we do as architects is, we care about design, but I think having empathy for people uh, to be able to be curious and help them solve their problems is probably one of the most important things we do. And I think to do that well, we have to be good listeners. Um, and that might be the first place to start.
And do you have any advice for architecture students in terms of technologies in design school or softwares? Are there certain systems and tech we should gain experience in to prepare for the workplace?
I think my advice would be to focus on ideas, maybe, and less on the tools. I think the most important tool for conveying ideas are still pen and paper, pencil and paper, and sketching things. Um, Technology has come a really long way as far as how we deliver, but with that comes a lot of kind of processes and standards that sometimes um, detract from the kind of the simpler, bigger vision of a project. And so I would encourage students to focus on ideas, and then there are different ways to achieve those and execute that later. But focus on the big ideas first. Um, and technology is always evolving. Um, when I was in school, the software that we used for modeling um, is not something I ever used professionally. And so I had to relearn things all over again. And I think developing the idea to the ability to adapt with technology is also a really important skill. So it's important to master, but also be flexible and adaptable.
Calicat, the Revit plugin, which ZGF helped create, helps architects understand the carbon footprint of a building model in Revit. Is this currently being widely used?
Use this most likely at all key project milestones as kind of a gut check to see just verify progress. Any tools that we create, we're using to make sure and verify for ourselves that we're hitting our sustainable goals.
Yeah, I have a question. Just, I know you t spoke about like the lighting and all that, but how do you work with all the different teams, like the engineers, the lighting specialists, and also like the sound consultants, especially with working with materials like mass timber?
Sometimes I feel like my role as an architect is to be a conductor of an orchestra where you've got your woodwinds, different instrument groupings that you're trying to get them to collaborate and be in harmony with one another. Um, Keeping that vision of what you're trying to get to at the forefront of your mind and their minds, um, and being sympathetic to what they're working on is kind of the biggest challenge. I think with mass timber, because it feels so very new to people, you are trying to um, get them to kind of break out of old patterns. And I think the area of greatest importance where we have Where we can achieve our greatest successes, but also have the most work to do, is around the integration of MEP. Traditionally, a lot of buildings have ceilings that cover duct work and conduit and cabling that happens above it. But the promise of mass timber is you can do more with less, right? You don't need all of those finishes, and you don't want them because you want to expose wood. But sometimes those consultants that we work with who have been doing this for many decades and have a lot of experience, they have to, understanding that somebody cares about exactly where that pipe is centered. Does it or does it not penetrate a beam? Can you not penetrate that beam? Influences how we design and coordinate. And we're finding that we have to do that so much earlier. Actually, to go back to, this is reminding me of, I guess, the kind of a question on technology earlier. Traditional design, architecture design and delivery, you used to have kind of low effort, limited labor early in a project, like during schematic. And then as you approached DD, you had more labor. And then construction documents, you've kind of reached your peak labor, and then it kind of drops off. But then with the advent of Revit and other BIM technologies, we're seeing that increase in labor actually going up earlier in a project and tapering off a little bit later. I think mass timber in a way has pushed that curve even earlier, because you have to decide so early, are you going to design, what is your structural system? Where are you going to source it from? Like, not the logs to go into the product itself, but is your glulam going to come from somebody like Zippo? Is your mass plywood coming from Freres? Is your CLT coming from Kolesnikov or SmartLam? Because each company kind of has its own uniqueness to their product. Vaughan is another one with CLT that's a little different than some of the other manufacturers. So you have to know those things early and decide whether or not you're going to stack your structure to allow things to pipes and ducts to circulate a little more easily. How much flexibility do you need if you're doing a lab building? Do you have huge, duct requirements, air change requirements with a lot of piping to coordinate? So all of it, design thinking has to happen early, and that has to drive the coordination between consultants. And it's really, everybody can do those, kind of go through the motions, but the earlier you make those decisions will help get you to that desired outcome.
We're both like third-year students, and I was wondering if you recommend getting a master's degree like right after graduation, or do you recommend take like working for a few years and then going to get a master's?
I think that choice is driven by so many different circumstances, but I think diversity of experience is really valuable. Like I'm sure you're finding in study abroad. I think exposing yourselves to things that motivate you, inspire you is really key. Getting practical experience is helpful too. It's a personal choice, but you're not much older than my older son, and the advice that I've given him is to to go with kind of where your gut tells you, but don't be afraid to give yourself some grace and learn something, try something new, and not feel like you have to kind of go through a prescriptive path. You can kind of blaze your own trail. I would say take the time to do that.